Welcome to the next lecture of Lifespan Development. Today we're talking about theory of human development and culture's influences on development. The objectives for today are to understand selected theories of development, discuss normal and abnormal development related to select theories, and describe how culture can influence development. So what is a theory? A theory is an explanation of a phenomenon. It focuses on universals versus individual variants. And theories may focus on particular domains of human development. Some theories might be more interested in attachment to parents, while others might be more interested in cognitive development. Theories help us organize our thoughts, though they should not limit them. As you can see, we're going to be going over a lot of different theorists in this lecture. We'll be moving fairly fast, and this lecture is meant to be a supplement to your readings and other resources. The first theorist that we're going to talk about today is Sigmund Freud and the Freudian theory of development. Freud proposed that the development of mental processes occurred around three separate structures within the psyche: the id, the ego, and the superego. Freud considered the id to be the most primitive form within the psyche. This was really focused on the pleasure principle and the satisfaction of drives. And this is something that is present at birth. It pushes to immediately satisfy whatever drives or cravings that we have without much concern about the ramifications. The second structure is the ego. This is considered the reality principle, which seeks to please the id's drive in realistic ways that will benefit in the long term. The ego at times has been likened to a rider riding on a wild horse trying to rein it in. That is the ego's relationship with the id. This can be likened to some of our higher level cognitive structures. And finally, the superego is the kind of the morality. It's the internalization of cultural rules. So between these three drives, the id, which seeks to immediately satisfy drives, the ego, and the superego, which is our morality component of our personality, conflicts can occur. And he found that these conflicts can be the root of different mental health challenges. Freud also had a development of biologic and psychosexual stages. This is pretty much just put into this for historical reference. There's really no backing to this, and has been largely discredited over time. Yet, due to Freud's kind of influential nature, I thought it'd be worth listing here for you to look at. Freud posited that individuals could become stuck within a phase and have predictable psychological disorders at any one of these stages. The next theorist we're going to talk about is Erickson's stages of development. Erickson proposed that development is a series of conflicts or crises that must be resolved, and that each developmental stage had its own unique crises. Resolution of a stage allows commencement of a next developmental stage, though one can become stuck in a stage. The first stage of Erickson's model is trust versus mistrust. Will the infant trust its caregiver to know that all of its needs will be met? If not, the infant may experience feelings of mistrust. The next stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. So the concept of autonomy is, can the young child feel differentiation of themselves from others? This can occur through toileting, the ability to say no, and if the infant or the young child does not get supported in this, it can have experienced feelings of shame and doubt. The next stage, initiative versus guilt. Can the child take initiative through constructive play, or will it have a feeling that its thoughts and actions are wrong or bad? At school age, the stage is industry versus inferiority. Will the child feel success and the ability to perform his or her duties within typically a school setting? Will it meet the school challenges? If not, he or she may have feelings of inferiority as compared to his or her classmates. In adolescence comes this concept of identity versus role confusion. Can the adolescent explore different identities and find through this exploration his or her own identity, If not, he or she may experience role confusion and not necessarily know who they are. In young adulthood, the stage is intimacy versus isolation. Can the young adult form intimate, close relationships with others? If not, the person might feel isolated from his or her peers. In middle adult, it's generativity versus stagnation. Can the adult feel that they are producing for society, kind of being able to mentor others to be able to be productive at work? If not, they may feel experience stagnation. And finally, in older adulthood, the concept of ego integrity versus despair. This is a reflective stage. Can the older adult look back and say this was a life well lived? If not, they may have feelings of despair. Another theory comes from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So Maslow stated that a person acts according to the priority of the need they are experiencing, and that one cannot address a higher level need when a lower level need is not satisfied. The top state of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is self-actualization. Here's a graphic where you can see you have to meet the needs of the lower stages before you can move to the higher stages. For example, you have to be able to satisfy basic physiological needs and basic safety needs before you can really focus on love, belonging, or esteem. And then finally, self-actualization being the utmost stage. Kohlberg was another a theorist within the lifespan development world, but he focused primarily on moral development. So he came up with a theory of development of morality and social conscience, and he broke it into 3 different levels as determined by age. Kohlberg found that there was a pre-conventional level that occurred between ages 4 and 10. Stage 1 of the pre-conventional level, people obeyed rules to avoid punishment, and at stage 2, rules were obeyed to gain personal benefit. So a fairly immature way to look at morality, but that was the age frame, and that's how morality begins to develop and why rules are followed. Within adolescence, there's a conventional level. Stage 3, rules are obeyed to maintain the respect of others. Stage 4, rules are obeyed to conform to society's rules and maintain social order. So a bit more of a social referencing. Finally is the post-conventional level. Kohlberg felt that this is unattainable prior to age 13 and that not everyone will get to this level. Some people are stuck at stages 3 or 4, even well into adulthood. Stage 5, rules are obeyed due to a social contract that may outweigh personal desire or gain, really as a consideration of the rights of others. And finally, stage 6, adherence to rules of conscience and individual ethical principles. So here the individual ways following rules set by society in relation to their own ethical principles and beliefs around that. Chess and Thomas's Dimensions of Temperament looked at how individual people have different temperaments and how this influences their development. Temperament is an individual's predisposition to a response, and is a reflection on the brain's neurologic and neurochemical makeup. Chess and Thomas felt that genetic factors influence 20 to 60% of temperament. So as we begin to look at the different types of temperament, it's knowing that 20 to 60% are already kind of predetermined. So different dimensions of temperament include activity level, rhythmicity, which are biological predictability such as eating, sleeping patterns. Are people more likely to approach a new situation or withdraw from a new situation? Level of adaptability, which is overall response to new situations. Sensory threshold, are we highly sensitive to stimuli or do we have a low stimuli? Quality of mood, are we generally positive or generally negative? Intensity of reactions, do we have a high level of energy when we react to something, or do we have a low level of energy when we react to something? How distractible are we? How persistent are we? And how can we focus our attention? All of these things are considered dimensions of temperament, and everybody has their own temperament profile. The contribution that Ainsworth and Bowlby made to the world of lifespan development was categories of attachment. They believe that infants are categorized by response to being reunited after separation with their mother. This was made famous in the strange situation experiment, in which a mother and child were in a room, the mother leaves and a stranger tries to comfort the child, and then the mother returns. Through their experiments, they found that infants can fall into one of three categories of attachment. The first category is a secure attachment. Infants consider the mother as a home base to explore. They are upset when the mother leaves, but they are happy on return. Avoidant attachment. The infant does not seek proximity to the mother and avoids her when she returns. An ambivalent attachment. The infant shows decreased exploration in the presence of mother and alternates between desire for comfort on her return and aggression on her return. Further studies showed that there were future implications related to these attachment categories, and that the attachment categories that infants showed when they were infants actually had long-term implications on future relationships and the attachments that people could form as adults. The next theory we'll talk about is Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Within it, organization of learning is what's focused on, or the tendency for integration of parts of learning into a whole understanding, or a schema, which Piaget considered to be a pattern of knowing something. Mental schemas were formed and influenced through bidirectional interaction with the environment through assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is incorporating information into a pre-existing schema. For example, if a child only knows birds through interaction with robins, but then they see a big crow, they can assimilate that crow into their pre-existing schema, which will increase the schema. Likewise, the process of accommodation, which is changing the existing schema to handle new information. An example of that could be an individual who only knows higher education from participation in on-ground traditional classes. Once they're introduced to online education, their entire schema might change in order to accommodate this new understanding of college. Piaget believed that schemas occur at certain stages, and certain complexities of schemas occur at different stages. The first stage is the sensory motor stage, which occurs from birth to 2. Here is primarily reflex-driven with preloaded schemas. An infant will see something and they'll put it in their mouth to understand it. It's more involuntary, more reflexive. As time goes on and as the infant becomes more complex, there's increased voluntary and purposeful action. And one notable milestone within the schema is the concept of object permanence, which develops between 8 and 12 months. With object permanence, an infant will know that even though they can no longer see the object, it still exists. The pre-operational stage occurs between ages 2 and 7. Here we get the development of symbolic function. Symbols are able to represent increasingly different items. An example comes from the phone experiment, where first an infant can play phone using just a real phone, but the representations of the phone became more and more abstract. The phone went from a real phone to a play phone, the play phone to a banana, and finally just to a wooden block. And the child was still able to play phone because he knew that it was a representation of a phone. He was able to understand that abstractness. This stage ultimately leads to letter understanding and reading, which are both symbolic. It's within this stage that egocentrism is still present, or the inability to take another's viewpoint. Examples of this are the 3 mountain experiment, in which a child looks at a design from one end of a table which has 3 mountains, but an adult looks at it from the other end. And they see if the child is able to have an understanding of the perspective of the mountains that the adult sees. And if they're in this egocentrism stage, they cannot. They can only see things through their eyes, and they can't understand that maybe somebody else can look at something from a different angle and see it slightly differently. This was also present in the ball and doll study, where they would have a child watch a video where an adult comes in and places either a doll or a ball in a certain place in a room, like the top drawer. They leave, then someone else sneaks in and moves it to the bottom drawer, and then the original adult returns. And the question is, well, where does the adult look for the ball or the doll? And they typically, the child with egocentrism thinks that they should look in the bottom shelf, because they can't understand that the adult might not know something that they do from not being in the room. At the concrete operation stage, which is 7 to 12, children be able to grasp this concept of reversibility, that things can change into one thing, but then change back. And this helps them with the ability to grasp mathematical functions. Also, as a concept of identity, things can be the same despite differences. For example, the water can be the same amount even though it looks different in a very wide, narrow container and a very skinny, tall container. At Piaget's formal operations, here people are able to think more and more abstractly, highly symbolically, and are able to use hypothetical and deductive reasoning. For Piaget, this is the highest level of cognitive development. Vygotsky's theory focused on zones of proximal development. A zone of proximal development is the concept that children have zones when they may achieve a new level of complexity or learning. They have certain time frames within their development where they are more likely to learn a concept. And it's really a social focused theory because Vygotsky believed that a child's support and surroundings have a lot to do with their ability to learn things. This concept of scaffolding feeds into that, or the dependence on assistance of another for development to the next level. Concepts within this are zones of free movement, which are the resources in the environment available to a child to hopefully gain that next learning, and also promoted actions, which are the actions or impulses promoted by a caregiver within the zone of free movement. So he believed that learning and growth were very socially dependent, and that was his unique contribution to the lifespan development theory. Gesell was known for his publishing of the Gesell schedules, which were large-scale norms of child behavior and development. These we see today in different forms where we look at developmental milestones to say, well, when should a child be able to walk? When should a child be able to roll or smile? A lot of these concepts really stem from these Gesell schedules, and they're based on multiple developmental assessments. One possible downside is that it kind of created a wait-and-see mentality where maybe early problems weren't treated because, well, this is wait and see if they hit their milestones. But in general, it gives us a really good guide. Some tenets of the Gesell theory: development occurs cephalocaudal, or from head to foot. It occurs proximal to distal, from inside to out. Medial lateral, from the middle to the lateral aspects of our bodies. And development proceeds up against gravity, where the child develops trying to push himself up from laying to head up to different positions, finally to a standing position. McGraw's theory really looked at critical periods and sensitive periods. Through her research, she found that infants and children have critical periods, or a limited time in which a development event is most receptive to occur. And then broader than this relatively narrow window are sensitive periods, which is an extended period of a critical period. So McGraw believed that there are critical periods for pretty much every developmental milestone, physical ones, social ones, language-based ones, and that these moments were important for the child to be able to maximize their development. Behaviorism influenced development, and we're going to go over this relatively briefly. Initially, the concept of how people learn was initiated by classical conditioning, and this can really take you back to your initial introduction to psychology courses. But classical conditioning believed that learning, and then as it influenced development, was a stimulus response, where something would occur, a stimulus, and there would be a response to it. That's how people developed and learned. Operant conditioning looked at how reinforcement and punishment led to behavior development, so that behavior was developed through either positive reinforcement or punishment. Well, Bandura really looked at this and thought that that was maybe a little too simplistic, and he brought his concepts of social learning. And he felt that, well, yeah, there certainly is some aspects of classical and operant conditioning, but he also believed that there's a social component to learning, that modeling leads to vicarious reinforcement. People learn by watching other people do things. The famous Bobo doll experiment had something to do with that when they had children look at how people would interact with these little punching Bobo dolls and how they would act aggressive after seeing aggressive behavior. They would learn it vicariously through modeling, in that case, negative modeling. He also found that self-efficacy influenced learning. A person's belief in their own abilities to learn and their own abilities to achieve influence their ability to achieve and their ability to learn. Offshoots of this theory included the concept of learned helplessness, which is almost the opposite of self-efficacy. People believe that they can't do something. And also the concept of a fixed versus growth mindset. A fixed mindset being what I know is what I know. I don't have the ability to learn new things, where a growth mindset is the opposite of that. I have the ability to grow and learn as I move forward in life. So theories provide a multi-contextual way to understand the phenomenon of human development, and they provide us a degree of predictive ability. We know what we should be seeing, and we know what we may be able to see in the future. Theories guide us in positively influencing human development. For example, if we know critical periods, sensitive periods, if we know certain proximal zones of when a child will be more apt to do something, we may be able to influence that. It was also important to know that culture influences development. So culture is the sum of experiences, values, beliefs, ideals, judgments, and attitudes that shape and give continuous growth for each individual. So how may a culture influence development? Well, everyone grows up and develops in a cultural niche, a developmental niche, which is the interaction of children's physical and social settings, customs, child-rearing practices, and beliefs of parents about caretaking. And this will influence everyone's development differently. Everyone has unique social interactions, unique occupational exposures, unique assumptions on what is valuable, and unique environmental contexts. Poverty and development also have a bidirectional influence. Individuals being raised in poverty will have a different developmental arc than people that are raised in a rich environment. So I'll leave you with a question. How may poverty influence development as viewed through developmental theory? And I just want you to think about this. How may poverty influence people's progression through Erickson stages or Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Think about how it may influence critical periods or zones of proximal development. It's only when we begin to overlay culture with theory that we get a richer understanding of what we're looking at. This concludes our lecture on theory. Continue to dig deeper in each of the theories, and I will talk to you at our next lecture.